What got you there with Sean DeLaney? What got you there with got you?
I got to play this to the absolute maximum outcome and potential that we've been handed. So my paranoia and where the drive comes from is that, are we doing enough? I live in constant fear that I'm missing opportunities and that I'm not doing enough. And the same is true with every conversation, with people that work with me. It's like, are you doing enough? Okay, what could you be doing? So we're constantly, trying to, get to the fullest, potential that we can envision for ourselves. For me personally, for every program, for every function, for every line of business, for every channel. I mean, you name it. Can we do more? And by the way, it's a hard way to live because you always feel inadequate. Like, you're not going far enough. You're not going hard enough. You're not going fast enough. We constantly live with that terminal fear for not doing enough.
Frank Slootman currently serves as chairman and CEO at Snowflake. Frank has over 25 years of experience as an entrepreneur and executive in the enterprise software industry. Slootman served as CEO and president of ServiceNow from 2011 to 2017, taking the organization from around $100 million in revenue through an IPO to $1.4 billion. Prior to that, Frank served as president of the Backup Recovery Systems Division at EMC following an acquisition of Data Domain Corporation, or Data Domain Inc., where he served as chief executive officer and president, leading the company through an IPO to its acquisition by EMC for $2.4 billion. Slootman is a legend in the technology world, and on this episode shares the 3 key elements that make up a performance culture, how to cultivate and develop talent, and what it's like taking a business from the brink of death to $1 billion in sales.
Frank, welcome to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, this is an exciting conversation for me. I'm very much looking forward to hearing some more about your journey and backstory, but I would love to know, what did you think you were going to be as a kid?
I really didn't have any, sort of clear missions as a kid. I know a lot of kids want to be a policeman, fireman, whatever. It sort of never, I never had a clear vision on what I wanted to be. I think I was, I was probably more paranoid, as I, sort of grew up, that I was able to successfully connect, with the workplace and, be independent and be able to make a living. We had the anxieties of our generation that kind of propelled us and inspired us and motivated us. We were not the generation that was following their passion. We were following the marketplace. A little bit different.
What inspired you to come to the States then? That's such a big journey.
It is a big journey, and especially in those days, people don't think much of it, at this time. But 30 years ago, it was kind of a big deal. I was always very inspired. I don't really know why, but I always felt inspired by the country, its scale, its history, its ideals, things of that sort. And, there's obviously we were very influenced by American culture, as any country, almost any country was. So certainly a fascination at that level. When I was in university, again, we're seeking to make the connection, with the workplace. And I thought it was going to be great if I had an opportunity to do some internships in the U.S. that would, obviously build the resume and would build the experience and build the marketability. And I had an opportunity to do it, so I did. So once I got to the U.S., obviously, it's a very different place than what people in Europe think it is. At least at that time, it was. I think the general perceptions there are very different than what we are really like as Americans. And it resonated with me so much. This is a very open society. It's a very buoyant society, meaning everybody feels that they can do better. And I just love that optimism, that energy, and that incredible desire to advance themselves and their children. In Europe, people are much more resigned to their station in life, and it is what it is, and we sort of settle into whatever whatever cards we're dealt, and that's it. That's not true in the U.S. I mean, everybody here thinks they can do better, and thinks they have opportunity, and it's a wonderful thing. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, it is what it is could be my least favorite saying. And so I just love your energy, your optimism. If we were having this conversation long ago when you came to the United States, would you have been able to foresee the success you've had now leading multiple public companies?
No, not at all. I'm serious when I say that. I mean, I never had grand designs, grand ambitions. I was much more, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, as they say. And one thing that did happen, because I was a foreigner in this country, I had credentials that were hard to pronounce. So my career strategy became one of taking on challenges that nobody else would touch with a 10-foot pole. Because I was going to take risks. I was going to do things that other people wouldn't do, because those were really the only avenues that were open to me anyways. So I took them, right? And I remember, being sent back to my native country in the mid-'90s by an American company, because they bought a company there. And within a very short period of time, that company didn't do well. And soon they found me because, I had the passport, I spoke the language, et cetera, et cetera. And everybody was telling me, don't go there. That place is going down. And I'm like, I'm going there, and I'm going to resurrect it. I was in my mid-30s at that time, and obviously moves like that, have built my career. Now, I was well into my 40s before I started getting real prime opportunities. Before that, I was just taking on train wrecks, And you learn a lot from that, by the way. You learn an immense amount from that. Everything that's wrong with the world. And when you look at new things, you know all the pitfalls, all the signs, and so while I didn't enjoy, working on these crummy businesses, it was incredibly formative and instructive for me.
Yeah, you mentioned taking on those challenges are such growth and learning opportunities. I mean, I have to imagine you had a few just overall step function improvements in terms of your capabilities. Any one specifically that you just think you might have learned the most from?
Well, there were a few. Just to give you a little bit more context for it, right? I often compare, opportunities as a combination of, in a card game, it's a combination of the cards you're dealt, which is a function of luck, and then how well you play those cards, which is a function of skill. And it's the same in companies, right? When you join a company, you're going to be dealt a hand of cards. It is what it is. Your least favorite saying, right? And then, okay, now how am I going to play those cards, right? If you're dealt a very good set of cards and you're a good card player, you can achieve hyperbolic results. But in my case, in my early going, my cards weren't that great. I felt like I played them well, but it certainly didn't sort of result in the stellar results, because, you start with limited beginnings. The outcomes are going to be limited as well. I often tell people when they ask for career advice, I say, be careful what elevator you step into. And the point is, you can't change everything about your choices. Okay. In other words, you're not in full control over these outcomes. A lot of it has already been determined before you get there. Some elevators go up, some go down, some don't move. So, you learn to step into a good elevator is like learning to get a good hand of cards, right? And you're way ahead of the game. And in Silicon Valley, it's not uncommon for people to do extremely well, even though they're not very good card players. They just know how to step into good elevators,
You think you're pretty good at finding those elevators to step into?
Apparently so. If you look at the last 20 years, I've had conversations with people who said, I can't figure you out whether you are either a good card player or you just know how to get a good hand of cards.
So I'm curious about that. Then how do you measure skill versus luck in your own life?
Well, it's obviously, stepping into elevators is the same thing that venture capitalists do, right? When they're backing a company or an entrepreneur, there's things that we look for, right? We look for markets that are large and expansive and dynamic and growing and unsettled, right? We look for extremely compelling products. I mean, it's not like, it's a luck of the draw. It's not. I mean, there's a lot of things. When I joined Snowflake, hell, I knew this thing was going to run. I mean, it was extremely obvious, to me. It was obvious to a lot of other people as well. In other words, but not everybody gets the opportunity to pick a Snowflake the way I did. Obviously, that was a function of, the 15 years that came before that.
What made you decide to come back and join them at that time?
Well, when I stepped down from from ServiceNow, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was classically burned out. Too many years in the firing line, and my ability to just sort of regenerate on a day-to-day basis had just deteriorated to the point that I thought I just need to retire because I don't need the money, and I just the pressure has worn on me. There's no doubt about it. I'm saying that with the benefit of hindsight. At the time, I didn't recognize it that way. But then, I was off for 2 years. I was sailing lots of regattas and having tons of fun, playing lousy golf, all these kinds of things. But then you wake up one day and you go like, this is the rest of my life, right? And people like us, have a very torturous temperament, right? It's just like football players. They're used to being on the field and living on the absolute, flaming edge, of performance, right? And after a while, you don't know how to live without it because it's the only time where you become the absolute best version of yourself, and it's the best circumstance for your particular makeup. So I never really made a decision like, what, I'm going to go see what's going on out there and so on. I didn't. I never decided. I just happened to get one day with the lead investor at Snowflake, who I was joining on another board with, who I'd known for a long time. And from time to time, he was telling me about Snowflake, and I listened politely and offered whatever opinions I had. But that was it. And, all of a sudden that just went from, polite conversation to, what would it take for you to take the helm of the company? And, the rest is history.
Yeah, that internal desire, you can only sit on the sidelines for so long. It's a light switch we really can't turn off. And it's funny, I always think about, why don't you retire to a beach? I mean, you're just not going to find your limit and your capabilities sitting on a beach somewhere. So they've got to be tested from time to time. It's
worse. You actually atrophy in many ways. I don't know what atrophy is the right term for it, but there's certainly a dullness that will come in. I mean, your mental sharpness is not the same as when you're under the gun on a day-to-day basis. It just isn't, because steel sharpens steel. We can only stay sharp if we are continually being sharpened, and you can only do that when you put yourself under the gun and you're in the arena.
Yeah, in the arena, Theodore Roosevelt right there. It makes me think, you were mentioning a few minutes ago just about the elevators you get onto. Say you were forced, you had to take a year off from Snowflake, and you were going to throw yourself in just the best learning environment possible. So we could say that would be under another CEO or just a part of another company. Is there any environments you've seen, this doesn't have to be tech related or anything like that, that you think would just be tremendous for personal growth?
I haven't thought about it. I don't have any pat answers to that question, but I'll give you what I was doing when I was off. I had a professional sailing team. Actually, they were all professionals except me. I was the only
You know how to surround yourself with talent.
Well, that's where I was going. So, running a professional sailing team becomes frighteningly analogous to running a business, because it's the combination of talent. You're seeking the absolute best people in the world. It's competition, intense competition that you have to react to. It's being on the race course with the elements that are constantly changing. The only difference with sailing was if you made a bad move, it would be obvious within seconds and minutes that you made a bonehead move. In business, unfortunately, it can take much longer to find out. The feedback is not as instant and direct. But it just came to realize is that how analogous these experiences really are, and that things sort of repeat themselves in different realms and different domains, but fundamentally the same. And I just realized that, I'm a very lateral, abstract thinker. I'm not a functional executive at all. And I think, CEOs typically benefit from being lateral and abstract thinkers because you have a very broad purview, right, of how you think about things and so on. And it's the same thing is true as in sailing, right? Because, you're in the boat, you're outside the boat, things are constantly changing. So it takes a certain posture to be able to process events, in real time and react to that. So it wasn't a diversifying. On paper, it looked like, that was a totally different deal. Yes, it was, but it was also similar in many ways. Yeah.
With hindsight, do you think you would have done something like that earlier in your career?
No, because I didn't have the money to do it.
There you go. So, I mean, we were kind of talking about that team build out, understanding so many different dynamics. And there was a quote from when you took over CEO of Data Domain in 2003. And I'm going to read that quote. And it's: "The time I joined Data Domain, had about 20 employees, no customers, no revenues, and a few units in field tests with a few $1 million left in the bank. We were months away from running out of money." Stepping in day one, what does that look like?
I'll tell you another little anecdote that's not in the book. So I remember literally my first day in the office. Our founder, principal professor by the name of Kylie, he's proudly walking me around the office, and it's a complete rat hole, the office. And there are stains on the carpet, there are stains on the ceiling. He bought all the furniture for like $1. It was a former Xerox building. And then he shows me my office, which is there's power cables running through everywhere and mismatched furniture. And he's like, "Sit down." And I'm sitting down, and the armrest breaks off the chair. I was like, I think I have sunk about as low as I can go right now. I have a company that's running out of money, that does not have a customer, does not have any revenue. And it's a total, the environment was like, wow, and by the way, I took like a 70% pay cut or whatever. Everything about it was just signaling bad. Okay. And it took years and years and years, for that to evolve. So that was a deep dig, and Data Domain is still the proudest set of moments in my career because we just built something out of nothing. We took 28 million in capital and turned it into 2.4 billion in 6 years. And that is the epitome of capitalism, when you're able to do things like that, right? And the things that we had to do along the way, the challenges that we had, the team that we built, you never get to experience that again, because there's only a first time once, right? And so it was you learn a lot about yourself and other people in these kinds of experiences, and I wish it upon everybody, to have lived a life like that and everything that comes with it.
Can you expand on what you mean by you learn a lot about yourself in those scenarios?
Well, because it is so immensely challenging and overwhelming. It's like, how am I going to make my way in the world with this tiny little company, improving at every level? And I got competitors like EMC and NetApp and IBM and Hitachi and on the biggest storage companies in the world. How's this possibly going to happen? And from that, we became the absolute juggernaut, in the industry. That product line is still the biggest profit generator at Dell to this day. I was told the other day by the executives over there. So it was an enduring business because we're now 15 plus years hence, right? And we're very proud of the enduring nature of what we built, right? These are not flash in the pan, type of enterprises at all. So we become so much stronger because the amount of confidence that we gain from these experiences is enormous. After a while, you feel invincible. It's like there's not a problem that I can't solve, right? And you become incredibly emboldened. Not to say cocky, maybe that's sort of the not so pleasing side of it, but it's very, very formative, to have lived through experiences like that.
Yeah, you mentioned the cockiness element, and this is one I always try to figure out. So I almost view it as extreme confidence due to challenges you've been able to overcome and tackle, mixed with your extreme optimism you're born with. Am I viewing that correctly?
No, you have much better words than I do. I wouldn't call myself an extreme optimist at all.
Okay.
I'm probably more on the other side of that. I'm somebody that sees problems everywhere, and I'm uber paranoid as well. So I have a posture that things are never good enough, and I see threats everywhere. I used to say in my all hands meeting, while we're sitting here, laughing and having fun and telling jokes, the competition is plotting to assassinate us right now. Right. And it's this realization that people are out to kill us, and they are. So, we live in a state of war at all times. That should be our mental mindset, because that's really what it is. Okay. And business is a modern form of warfare. Luckily, people don't get killed, but companies do. Yeah.
Yeah. I probably shouldn't have used the word optimism there because, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I mean, you understand these threats, these challenges, you're always seeing the flaws and everything, but it's that you haven't accomplished this yet, but you still feel like you're capable of doing it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I'm just so curious too. I would love to even just decouple like the first few months there. How do you even turn that around? I'm just thinking about employee morale, landing contracts, anything like that. Where do you even start?
Well, I remember, in that first week, I visited one of our 4 test sites that we had was Stanford University, and I was going to meet with the IT director over there. And the deal that we had was, hey, you get to keep the unit, which is like a 3U rack mounted unit. And we just want to have a service contract with you, for $5,000 a year. I mean, extremely nominal amount even back then. And when I proposed that to them, they were offended. So I remember coming back that night thinking, holy crap, I can't even do a $5,000 service contract. What kind of a business is this? Right. I mean, that was just like the lowest of low. Just remember, we hadn't done a single dollar revenue at this point. Not one, zero. And I can't do a $5,000 service contract with somebody who I've given a $50,000 system to. Right. So think about it, and then it becomes a multi-billion-dollar business with enormous profit and staying power and all these kinds of things. And the reason I'm telling you is you can't judge things, when they are in their infancy in terms of what their eventual potential really will be, because there's a huge gulf between, what things look like in their embryonic form versus what they can become. Obviously, we know that from nature, but in business, sometimes it's like, it doesn't look so hot in the early days. Yeah.
You even mentioned one of those principles from biology. I'm wondering, have you actually studied nature biology to see laws of nature that might influence how business is actually handled?
I mean, you look at, giant sequoias, it's like there was a time where, that was just a seedling, right? That's just a fact, and you just marvel at, how things get to become so enormous, so.
Yeah, talking about that growth there. So in 6 years, you guys took Data Domain and you grew to sell more than any other of your competitors. You broke the $1 billion sales barrier in less than 7 years, adding more than 1,000 employees. What is it like being in that type of environment, in such rapid growth mode and such a quick turnaround?
This is another very important thing about how we go about business. We have extremely high clarity on our mode of execution. And, what we understood very clearly after a period of time is that we have to, on an annual basis, we have to more than double the capacity and the speed of these systems. We call it turning the crank. Every year, we turned the crank. And we were running on the Intel roadmap because it wasn't completely CPU-enabled architecture. It was not storage enabled. It was not based on disk I/O. It was based on CPU. And at that time, Intel was doubling every year. And we were, in terms of the number of cores, and we were literally, running off the Intel roadmap. And every year, our market got bigger, bigger, bigger. So our systems got bigger, faster, bigger, faster. And that clarity and that extreme focus on making, and that just kept opening up the market so much for us. And after a while, there were no constraints on us. And I mean, this was a deduplication storage system. Well, what that means is it eliminates duplicate segments on the fly, which creates an extreme efficiency effect in storage, right? So economically, it's very, very compelling, but it's a very expensive computational process to try and figure out what's redundant and what isn't, what's new and unique. In the end, the system became so fast that we were able to land data faster deduplicated than other people could land it raw. Right. So in other words, we had so overachieved on our strategy and our architecture that this thing was like, defying gravity now. Right. It was amazing. But that was years and years and years and years, of consistent hardcore execution on the same themes.
Yeah, we're going to get more to that speed and essentially how you guys function and operated. I am wondering though, so how many months after you fixed the armrest there on your chair did you really develop that clarity? I mean, it just seems like a total shit show and chaos from the beginning. So I'm wondering how early on you were like, nope, this is the roadmap, this is where we're going.
Well, I mean, I knew very quickly that the system was extremely small. I mean, 1 terabyte usable space in a 3U array. I mean, you can't even imagine that right now, given how much storage you have on your phone, right? But this is now 2003, 2004 timeframe, and I remember meeting another one of our 4 test customers, and I was meeting with the CIO there, the highest ranking IT executive, and he wanted to tell me. He said, "Hey," and this was on a Monday, right? It was literally the Monday that I joined. In the afternoon, I was seeing this guy. He said, "Your little box was a real hero here on Friday night." And I'm like, tell me more. And he's like, we had a massive corruption in our email database. Back then that sort of thing, happened, right? And they were going to restore their email database from a prior version. This is what you did back then, okay? And it was going to take all weekend, and they were going to restore from their tape backup, right? And then they remembered that their email database was backed up on our test unit. So, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. By 7 o'clock, they were going home. They were done. And all of a sudden, the light bulb went on. They were like, holy crap, this is the most amazing thing ever, right? It wasn't just, it was the fact that this tiny little 3U unit could back up this database and with massive speed restore it, because disk back then was so much faster and so much more surefire than a tape backup. So then we knew we had at least one use case that we could go and present over and over again and say, hey, use it for this particular use case. And we kept ourselves alive while the system got bigger and faster, so we could go after file systems and databases and things of that sort, so.
Yeah, just staying alive can end up being a superpower there.
Yeah, because we were actively debating, maybe we should just shut ourselves down for a year, conserve cash, just keep working on the product, and then we'll restart ourselves a year from now. And instead, we figured out, no, we can have a few salespeople and we can start selling and establishing ourselves. And we wouldn't sell that much. I mean, I think the first year we started selling, we sold like $3 million, which by today's standards doesn't sound like a whole lot. But the year after that, it was 15. The year after that, it was 45. The year after that, it was 125 million. And then it was like, 250, 500, in other words, it was ripping, absolutely ripping. And these systems are still out there all over the place. I see customers every day that say, oh yeah, I still got data domain. So it's awesome, So.
Oh yeah, I mean that's incredible. Taking that from absolutely nothing and developing this technology that's still around. I feel like the word that just keeps coming back to me for you is adaptability. And there's a great line you have, and this is about you being CEO. And my role is situational. I become the CEO I need to be, the one the situation warrants. It also changes over time. I have no playbooks. I'm entirely situational and operate on so-called first principles. I would just love if you even unpack that a little bit more. I love that. Yeah,
I say this quite often, by the way, because people ask me, tell me what your playbook is. And I'm like, forget playbooks, okay? And because the moment you start thinking playbooks, you become a prisoner of your own experience, okay? Mm-hmm. So you have to fight it, because human beings, human nature, what it is, we always want to rely on what we know, right? As opposed to, no, I'm not going to rely on what I know. I'm going to rely on reasoning through, like a 5-year-old who's never seen the situation before. What is the right way to think about it? Here's the problem in business, right? If you compare it to medicine, right? You go to a doctor will spend 95% of his or her energy diagnosing what the hell is wrong with you. Once they figure that out and they have eliminated all the other, possibilities, it's very simple what the protocol is for treatment. So it's 95% diagnosis and 5% treatment, right? In business, it's the opposite. We rush to conclusions, okay? In other words, we spend 5% on diagnosis and we spend 95% on the solution. Here's the problem. If you're wrong on the diagnosis, the solution won't work, okay? And that's what medicine knows, okay? So in other words, I spend way more time trying to think through what is the problem. And I cannot tell you how many meetings I go through every day, even now, where people they start off in their presentations talking about what they're proposing to do. And I'm like, wait, let's go back all the way to the beginning. What are all the potential explanations for what is going on here? And everybody stares at me like, well, it's like this. Well, and then we start questioning, well, how do you know that? Right? And this is so important, in any domain or any endeavor, is that we maintain what I call intellectual honesty, as opposed to jumping to conclusions and trying to pull a trigger. Because if you are wrong, everything you do will be ineffective and wrong also. So spend more time, on analysis. And then, first principles just means, I'm trying to understand it, without bias and prejudice from my prior lives. By the way, VCs are terrible this way because VCs don't have any real experience, never had a real job. So what do? They pattern match from other companies, right? Which is terrible. Forget the other companies. It means nothing. It's a different era, different business, different everything, right? So this pattern matching thing is another thing that I object to. I can give you spectacular examples where people, by the way, this is one of the most annoying things as a startup CEO. You get lectured by VCs on other companies. And the damn thing that happened is, Data Domain became the company that other people were lectured on. And I always said, I'm so sorry that you're being lectured on Data Domain. We never wanted you to be lectured on us, because we know how irritating that is, So your world is different than ours,
I absolutely love that. I came across this small little book. It's actually the book they give to CIA analysts, so Central Intelligence Agency, and they do a lot of that decoupling, destructing, figuring out root cause, and then working off of that, much like a great doctor would do. You mentioned being the CEO of a startup. You've been CEO of a startup, CEO of a massive company, take companies public, join when they're public. What is the difference between a startup CEO versus a public company CEO?
Well, just to maybe use some sailing metaphors.
No, I love them. So keep them coming.
It's like sailing a dinghy versus sailing a 100-footer. 100-footer with massive crew and stability and kind of sails itself, whereas a dinghy is just you're the ballast on the boat, for Christ's sakes. Okay, so everything is just you're so close to the metal, and things are so fragile and unstable and unwieldy and by the way, your constant presence is required. It will literally will not stand up, without you for a very long period of time. And it's great and fun. When businesses get too big, and I certainly had that at ServiceNow, I felt like I started to preside instead of drive. And I don't want to preside. This is just not, I don't preside over things. I'm a hard driver. That's just my makeup. So once I got layers and layers and layers between me and the action, I'm kind of not well deployed anymore, and I'm not very effective, and I'm just not enjoying it. I don't think I can do better than the next guy at that point. So this is a reason why I love the ServiceNow experience, because it's extremely formative, and of course Snowflake was a very similar thing. These are we really started. You get past the formative stages of crossing the chasm. And now we're starting to completely form our models and our processes and the investability of the business. And then we apply the resources like crazy. And you see the yields, and it jumps and jumps and jumps. And it's very exciting. I mean, I've already been on the phone this morning with, numbers of, very large customers and prospects. That's the stuff we like. We want to be in the fight every single time, and very, very close to the metal, as close as you can get.
Yeah, I love it. Get back to Roosevelt, the man in the arena there. You know how much I loved your article, Amp It Up, which of course will be in the show notes. And you hit on three main vectors to really bring this high performance culture, and that's increase velocity, raise the standards, and narrow the focus. And I'm curious around increased velocity. And there's always that fine balance, because you even mentioned that you got burned out. So how do you judge that within your employees, like revving them too hard and then pulling back?
Well, when I talk about velocity, I often bring up the example of going to the DMV or Secretary of State. Human beings naturally gravitate towards a glacial pace because they're like, well, I got to be here anyways, 8 hours a day. What damn difference does it make how slow I work? So people essentially work much slower than they can. They lack urgency, and they sort of want to they just settle into a pace that's way slower than what they're capable of. And it's not just that we get less done, it's just the energy goes out of the place, right? That's the worst part. When you pick up the pace, all of a sudden it feels like the place is getting engulfed in energy, and everybody else they got pep in their step, they got energy, they have a smile on their face, they feel like they're making headway, right? So it's really important, just in general momentum, just to maintain a very good tempo. And, when we're discussing topics, and I think I've mentioned this, in a blog post that I wrote, people often want to come back to me in 2 weeks or a week. And I'm like, well, what about 2 days from now? Okay. Instead of next week or tomorrow morning. It's like, well, you've already done a lot of work. I mean, by the way, What changes when you compress the time frames? People just start thinking differently. This is exactly what I wanted to do, think differently. You know, I mean, it's like in combat. You have a split second, you know, to make a decision about what you're going to do, right? So in other words, in business too, we have to train our reflexes to think much faster and quicker rather than this lethargic pace, which is just, you know, which is just unbearable for people like, not just me, but people like me. And I try to hire people that have that same intolerance of slowness and lethargy and this lack of energy, which makes people just, you know, daydream and want to be somewhere else, you know.
Oh yeah, that intolerance, and correct me here if my mental model is wrong on this, but those high performers, you throw them in an environment like that and they love it. They thrive in it and they even raise their standards more. Where mediocre players, whoa, this is too much for me. I am not comfortable here.
Well, I mean, that's another thing that I've written about is the difference between drivers and passengers. And in other words, the passengers are the ultimate B players, right? They're the people in the middle. And B players are the people that kill your companies. It's not the C players, the people that are not in good standing, because they, you know, the organization will deal with that in one form or another. But B players are tolerated because people have low standards, right? Which is why, you know, we talk about raising our standards. B players are the real threats. This is why companies like IBM and HP, you know, became what they became, because you have to fight your B players as much as you fight your Cs all the time. So that's why we talk about raising standards, right? A lot of people have a good enough mentality about them. And, you know, and again, I've often quoted, you know, Steve Jobs, because he was a very colorful man in the kinds of, you know, things that he said, but, you know, it wasn't insanely great. He's just not interested, you know? So, you know, so in other words, good enough, you know, I often, when people make proposals to me, instead of me saying what I think, I ask them, what do you think about this? Do you love it? And they kind of squirm in their seat and they go like, well, it's okay. And I'm like, well, I think you got your answer. Come back when you feel insanely excited about what you're talking about. Okay.
We're talking about raising the standards. Is that how you instill the expected level of quality? Because that's after, call it iteration one. I'm wondering, is there something on those initial steps for even new employees coming in that you can just let them know what quality truly means in this company?
Well, here's my supposition. I think there's always room up on quality, always, because people are mentally lazy. Okay, they don't have that rigor where they're demanding themselves to be absolutely thrilled to bits with what they're talking about. Now, instead, they're like, they want to check a box, get it off their desk, and it needs to be passable. And we need to fight passable with everything we've got. So until we're thrilled to bits, but it doesn't matter what it is, right? I mean, I had a situation not too long ago where human resources had designed a T-shirt for some event, and they wanted to show it to me. Not that I'm really, you know, heavily involved in evaluating T-shirts normally, but they wanted to show it to me, and I looked at it and I was like, "What do you think?" You know, and she kind of looked at me and she knew the answer because by now they know me, right? In other words, it's like, if you're not thrilled with it, why do you show it to me? Okay. In other words, guys and gals, come on, you know, we're going to do something. Let's do it with everything we've got. There's very easy room up in doing things better. And by the way, you know, when you're watching professional sports, and I'm a 49ers fan, but I always enjoy watching Seahawks. You know why? Because there is a level of energy and application of how they go about playing the game that gives them that fraction of a second extra that starts to unsettle the opponent's you know, playbook, right? Because they just have that slight edge, and that is just a function of how they get up and get in the game. It's not some, you know, incredible, you know, playbook. It's just that they ask more of themselves, just a little bit more, right? And it makes the difference in everything. And in business, it is so easy to drive for better results because the bar is low, you know?
Yeah, you talk about the Seahawks. You want to think about those energy levels. Just watch Coach Pete Carroll in terms of what he does. And I mean, every single day, the energy that man brings is pretty remarkable. One thing I'm really curious to get your take on, because you're such a master at discipline, right? Like, you understand focus and narrowing in. How do you get the people on your team to not only understand that, but then also execute on that right away?
Well, it starts with hiring, right? You know, I mean, in other words, I need like-minded people. I absolutely have to have that because, you know, sometimes you know, and this has happened many times in my career, I've been able to move people to become different versions of themselves because they just grew up in a crap environment and they just didn't know, you could be like this, right? And I often tell people, if I'm not telling you no 10 times a day, you're not pushing me yet. You're not even getting to the bar. He says, if I have to start pushing you, we have the wrong relationship. Okay. I expect you to drive me out of my model where I'm saying, hey, I can't take it anymore. Slow down. Right. So I am driving these characteristics in people through my own behavior. But I've had a lot of people, they don't need to be there. They are self-started completely. And that makes for great organizations because I don't have to look over their shoulder. I don't, because these people are completely self-propelled. You love that, right? The energy mix becomes, electrifying,
Yeah, I know. I absolutely love that. I am curious, though, even the most special and talented members on your team, what skill set or mindset of yours is just hardest to pass on to others?
Not sure there's one. Here's the thing, right? I had a question the other day from a reporter who said, how do you define success? And I was completely unprepared for that question. And I really didn't know how to answer it. And I finally said, I just don't. Okay. I just don't think in those terms. But I'll tell you how I do think. And my mental model is always, I've been handed potential. Back to the card game, right? I have a set of cards. Now I got to play this to the absolute maximum outcome and potential that we've been handed. So my paranoia and where the drive comes from is that, are we doing enough? I live in constant fear that I'm missing opportunities and that I'm not doing enough. And the same is true with every conversation, with people that work with me. It's like, are you doing enough? Okay. What could you be doing? So we're constantly, trying to, get to the fullest, potential that we can envision for ourselves. For me personally, for every program, for every function, for every line of business, for every channel. I mean, you name it. Can we do more? And by the way, it's a hard way to live because you always feel inadequate. Like, you're not going far enough. You're not going hard enough. You're not going fast enough. We constantly live with that terminal fear for not doing enough. And that is the propulsion of what we do. That's where it comes from.
Yeah. Feeling inadequate and never doing enough. I am curious then, a public company CEO. So where are you spending the majority of your time? And then what's the barometer you use to measure the impact of that time?
Well, I'm spending a lot of time with major customers, major prospects, right? I mean, it's just campaigning at the highest levels of business. And I have to because, our contracts are enormously huge in terms of dollar value. We're fighting the biggest companies in the world. So I'm personally involved in these campaigns, more so than I've been in my prior companies, by the way. But so other than, selling, in terms of, acquiring customers, growing customers, I'm in the talent game, right? So I am, because, talent is everything, right? If you have an incredibly good talent game, you can actually be quite mediocre yourself. I've seen sales managers who really weren't that good, who were incredibly good recruiters, and they had stellar results. So if you're a good talent person, you can lose a few steps yourself. So I get incredibly excited about hiring great people. That is the thrill of my career and my day and my week and my month, is just getting after the best people in the world. And by the way, that's the same thing. When we're hiring, when I detect, a lack of enthusiasm, or, we're not over the top wildly enthusiastic, it's like, time out here. We are failing the litmus test here. Why? In other words, I want to know why, right? And, pretty soon the damn thing starts to unravel because there's a problem. We all should be thrilled to bits, when we hire absolutely critical positions. And again, it's having high standards. It's what it is. Aim as high as you can possibly hire. Does it mean it goes slower? Yes, it will go slower. But there's no higher cost in hiring the wrong person. Okay, so that's, these things are they're constant battles. It's never over. It's every interaction, every moment of the day. These situations are in front of you, and you need to be willing, in terms of mental energy, to get after it every single time, as opposed to, well, I'm tired. I'm just going to let this go and agree with it. No, you're not going to agree with it. You're going to oppose it, and you're going to call it out. Now, culturally, after a while, an organization starts to, adopt that culture and mentality, and then it starts to self-propel itself. You don't have to be the instigator every single time,
Yeah, you've got a great line, trust your team, nothing else scales. I absolutely love that. And obviously you put so much thought and effort into this. I am wondering, when you said all of a sudden, like that mindset is just evolved, that flywheel's going in terms of what that culture is. When you've scaled up companies, where have you seen that number usually start to take place at?
There's a number of people.
Well, just like what you were saying, just that attitude, that effort, that energy, what should be instilled here in the culture? How long does that take to really catch onto that flywheel that all of a sudden the entire company is going to act like this, no matter how many employees we bring on?
Yeah, well, it's one of those classic, things. Some people will get with the program, some just will not, and they have to go. And I'm fairly quick to conclude that. By the way, I didn't always used to be this way. I mean, I used to be more tolerant. I used to think that I could change people. Now I don't. I make the change. And I often make the change, not because somebody's a bad person, but just because I don't know. And not knowing is not acceptable to me. So if I can get a known great player in a role, I will make that change. Okay, because I can't wait around for 6-12 months to find out, because the cost of that is potentially enormous, right? So it's people that get with the program quickly and become, in other words, culture bearers in that sense. Great. Get the wrong people off the bus, get the right people on the bus, and then it's a matter of reinforcement every second of the day, every interaction, every engagement, every situation. You reinforce. And I always tell people, culture is not a poster on the wall. Culture is the willingness to prosecute the deviation of culture and, show everybody that you're not accepting it. You're calling it out for everybody to see. That's how culture gets built. Just declaring high-minded principles does nothing.
Yeah, it's got to be lived. I'm really intrigued then. I mean, obviously, Snowflake had an absolutely historical IPO. How do you maintain the drive and energy of those early employees who are now reaching shares vesting and things of that nature? How does that drive stay there?
Well, they're all terrified, which is a great state of mind. No, I mean, we all live in terror. That's our normal state. I mean, I think I wrote this as well. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. If you're comfortable, you're clearly not pushing hard enough. So I expect discomfort, for everybody. And but the way we stay motivated is we're very non-incremental in our attitudes, right? In other words, we have great, bold ambitions for ourselves and for our business. So day to day, we're like, how do we deliver on that? We sell it, we campaign it, and then we build it again and again. So we test ourselves on is it working? Is it not working? What do we have to do different? So we're so engrossed in what we're doing that we forget to think about, gee, am I motivated or not? We're on a mission here, okay? Forget the money. Money is a demotivator. It's not a motivator. If you don't have it, you kind of piss. If you do have it, it does nothing for you, So.
Yeah, those A players, they're not going to find their potential on the beach. You were mentioning a while ago, just you're an abstract CEO and thinker. So I'm really curious, though, about how you've handled recently putting your cap table to work, and specifically around your Series G and just like the strategic initiatives there, bringing on Salesforce and even Dragoneer. How do you approach that at this stage? Because you said it's not necessarily about bringing on the additional money, but about the other intangibles they have.
Yeah, well, we started, and again, having done 3 IPOs, we learned a few things along the way, and we really put that to work. And Mike Scarpelli, our CFO, he and I go back 16, 17 years now in 3 IPOs, 3 companies. So we've learned along the way, about a lot of things. And of course, by the time Snowflake came around, I mean, we were in an extremely good position to really do it the way we wanted to do it. Underwriters were not dictating things to us anymore. We had full control over allocations, over pricing, and all these kinds of things. But we started more than a year ago, before the IPO, on assembling the institutional ownership that we wanted to have, that we wanted to own the company. Okay, these are people that we have known from prior companies that we have experience with, and these are people that they will buy and build positions, very large positions, multi-billion-dollar positions. They're not momentum chasers, and they sign up for the journey, for 5 to 10 years. There are not that many. There were only, maybe 2 dozen, people like that we wanted to have. So first of all, we started educating them, getting them involved in the business so they could start doing research over time. They would be talking to partners and customers long before the IPO ever happened, right? Then we did a secondary where we started really rotating out our early shareholders, and we started to allocate some private stock to them, so they became, invested, not huge numbers, but part of the process. And then with the promise that in the IPO, you're going to get disproportionate allocations because you're the people that we want. Okay. And then, post IPO, we expect you to continue to, build positions, right? So what that does is that by the time the IPO rolls around, you have a very high conviction ownership group. Okay. This is the reason why, the stock price rocketed up so much, because there was nobody that wanted to sell, and tons of buyers, so it is a great way to do things because the quality of your ownership is really, really important. A lot of people think an IPO is just a transaction. I'm selling a bunch of shares. I'm going for the highest price. Actually, you have a miserable existence if you're going for fast money. I'll tell you that right now. And I have lived that life. When you have a small market cap company, you have a lot of fast money in your stock. It's not fun. Okay. So.
No, thank you for the clarity on that. That's incredibly helpful. I know we've got to wrap up here in a minute. I am interested, though. Say you and I, we were going to get on a sailboat here for an entire year, and you could only get one metric back about Snowflake. You couldn't do anything. What metric do you want to see? It's
consumption. We are 100% a consumption company. We run the entire business on consumption. We don't, consumption is also what drives bookings. Bookings don't drive consumption. So our business model is incredibly transparent. So this is the beautiful thing. I was not a big fan of the SaaS, software as a service model, because you're licensing use rights, right? In other words, it's not using the product, it's just licensing the right to use the product. That's what you charge for in software. And I never liked it because it wasn't equitable with customers. Whereas this model is you only pay when you use it. You don't use it, you don't pay, right? It's a consumption model. So I think software has become so much more equitable, and this is the future of software, the way Snowflake is doing it, the public cloud vendors, AWS and Microsoft and Google and so on. So now we have the entire company aligned around the consumption model. If it moves consumption, great. If it doesn't, we don't do it. Again, high clarity. By the way, driving clarity in businesses is insanely important, all the time. So.
No, I absolutely love that. That provided a lot of clarity for me there. I know you're much more of a doer, the man in the arena, but have there been any influential books throughout your life that were just helpful for you from a business sense?
Yeah. One of them that I think about all the time is a book by Stephen Covey Jr. It's a book called The Speed of Trust. And this is sort of something that I have in common with some other people out there. I do believe that trust is the highest currency in life and in business and any other endeavor. And trust is something you have to work on really systemically and very purposefully, right? And when you have trust, then the business almost starts to go downhill, and it starts to roll downhill instead of fighting your way uphill, right? Because when there's trust, everything gets easier and quicker, and it's more enjoyable, and it's just an incredible thing, and it's so intangible, right? And when you lose trust, it's nothing but friction in everything that you do. So it's not just with customers, it's with employees, it's with partners, right? So it's very, very important that we always speak truth to power, right? That we are incredibly transparent in our actions, in our motives, and how we think about things. So trust is really the most foundational value of any human endeavor. But obviously, when we're talking about businesses, that's what we build. I need our employees to trust me all the time. So I'm very, very transparent with them, to a fault sometimes, okay? But after a while, they know when I'm saying something, I mean it, okay? And they know it. So the book is really good because it articulates a lot of sort of underpinnings in a conceptual manner, why trust is the most essential currency that you have to work on, fight for, and think about all the time.
Yeah, you and I both subscribe to that and the importance of trust there. So final one here, Frank. If you could sit down with anyone, dead or alive, just do this for hours, have a nice dinner, have some conversation, who would you choose to sit down with?
Oh, historical figures or current?
Yeah, not a family member or friend.
No. I'm a huge history buff on this country. Being a foreigner in this country, I can't tell you how versed I am in the history of this country, going all the way back to days prior to the Revolutionary War and then Civil War and so on. And I'm a big bull in this country as well, way more than the average American these days. But I probably read 4 or 5 different George Washington biographies, because these people were so formative. They had their flaws and their failures, but I am immensely inspired by characters of that magnitude. So yeah, if I had an opportunity to chew the fat, it's something like that, that'd be amazing. I am, and there's other figures in history that just have been so great. And the whole notion of inspiration is another thing that's very important to me. When we talk about trust, I also talk about inspiration all the time, because that's really what we try and do with people, with customers. We try to inspire them. You can't really sell people. You can only inspire them to buy something, right? So how do you inspire, right? And you do that through your conduct, And so those things are really important to me.
Yeah, no, Frank, you mentioned people you've been immensely inspired by. That's you. You've been that for me, so I appreciate that. The amount I've learned from you has been tremendous. So this has been an absolute blast for me. Of course, we'll have your writings, the book Tape Sucks, lined up in the show notes. Anywhere else you want the listeners staying connected, finding out more about Snowflake?
Obviously, our website, we blog on there, as well. Those 2 blog posts that I have on my LinkedIn profile, they're kind of the book version of the 21st century. Instead of writing a book, I'm like, I just have a 6-page blog post. It's incredibly dense if you take the time to try and consume it. But that's, I try to, I'm not trying to sell people on how I think about things. To me, it's just, hey, try it on for size. If it speaks to you, great. If it doesn't speak to you, that's fine also, right? Because it doesn't matter to me whether you're a convert or not. I'm not trying to convert anybody to anything. The only reason that I write it is because I get asked so often, and I needed to have a standard way to let people approach these subject matters, rather than a million conversations for which I don't have the time anymore.
Yeah, well, Frank, this has been incredibly inspiring, really enlightening. So I appreciate so much you joining us on What Got You There.
All right. Well, enjoyed being on the program. Thanks for having me.
What got you there with DeLaney? 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 What got you there with DeLaney?